Dear friends, on behalf of the Baha'i Chair for Studies in Development, I would like to welcome our distinguished panelists and all the participants who are joining us on Zoom as well as live on Facebook to this webinar on the theme of building a more caring world, implications for the community. This is the second in a series of webinars being organized by the chair on the overall theme of building a more caring world, implications for the family, the community, and the market. As we know, after the family, it is the community consisting of people living in a geographic proximity to each other that provides the most natural setting for building relationships and networks of care. A sense of connection with other human beings is a precondition for relationships of care. In the case of the family, it is kinship that establishes this connection. What connects people in a community is a communal bond formed out of collectively owning and managing common resources, supporting and helping each other in ways that neighbors do, and participating in various forms of community life and collective action. Communities provide an invaluable support structure to the individual and the family, especially in times of crisis. The fabric of neighborly friendship is woven by myriad everyday expressions of sharing and mutual support, whether in helping each other, sharing food, watching out for each other, checking on those who are ill, celebrating festivals together, or participating together in the happy and sad moments of life. The solidarity formed through such close ties becomes a powerful source of resilience for the members of the community. Further, the atmosphere of goodwill and trust that such expressions of generosity, friendship, kindness, and hospitality generates provides a strong foundation for collaboration on more complex civic endeavors that require collective deliberation, decision-making, and action. In the context of care, the importance of strong communities with established practices of reciprocity and mutual support cannot be overstated. For example, during the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in India, this was evident in how community members helped each other find medicines, oxygen tanks, and hospital beds when the resources of the state were overwhelmed by the magnitude of the crisis. The crucial role of the community in ensuring individual and family well-being is not restricted to times of crisis. Families come together in villages and urban neighborhoods to help each other with everything from informal arrangements for childcare to financial security, especially in cases of socially and economically underprivileged communities. In the long-term development of human capabilities, the community's contribution is vital, even when it takes an indirect form. Yet, in various ways, the policies that are shaped by the dominant economic order, which prioritizes profits over people, discourages and disincentivizes the development of vibrant, inclusive, and diverse communities based on shared civic commitment. Increasing privatization of the commons threatens to reduce the public spaces where members of a community can socialize, deliberate, and collaborate. Due to economic insecurities and the competitive pressures created by the existing economic structures, people feel compelled to focus on themselves and pursue their own self-interests, leading to isolation and loneliness, and making it harder for them to form communal ties. Without a proper appreciation of the value of communal bonds, relationships and indeed the community itself can be seen as an instrument to serve some form of individual gain. At the same time, due to growing polarization in society and insecurities and anxieties created by the current economic policy, there is a growing tendency to form insular communities around the identity or interests of particular ethnic, religious, racial, caste, or class-based groups. Thus, most communities today are in a state of crisis, with growing individualism and apathy on the one hand, and increasing trends towards insularity and parochialism in social relationships on the other. The challenge then is to develop purposeful, cohesive, and inclusive communities where all are valued and cared for equally, irrespective of their social, economic, or religious background. It calls for the cultivation of a consciousness of oneness that elevates one's attachment to a particular group or community above any form of chauvinism, and that imbues one's motivations to serve one's fellow men in local settings with the noblest of sentiments. At the same time, consciousness is intimately connected to action. One of the most powerful ways to strengthen the bond between the individual and community is through creating avenues for meaningful civic participation that address the caring needs of community members. Friends, with these words of introduction to the broad theme of our discussion today, I would like to now welcome our panelists to share their comments, which is based on a very rich body of experience, both in the field and with policy making. Before I invite our first speaker, I would like to inform our participants both on Facebook and on Zoom that they can send in their questions on the Q&A box on Zoom or to the link that we have provided for those who are on Facebook. And we will share these questions with the questions and comments with the panelists after the second speaker has spoken, and also after the fourth speaker has spoken towards the end of the discussion. Our first speaker today is Dr. Uma Mahadevan Sengupta, who is the Additional Chief Secretary of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj Department of the Government of Karnataka. I would like to request Dr. Uma to please share her comments.
Thank you. And thank you for organizing this important discussion on caring and building a more caring world, and what we can do to do so. I have a few thoughts which I'd like to share with you, not in any particular order, but about what people like us within the government are doing in terms of programs, in terms of care infrastructure, in order to care for some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. Let me see if I can share my screen. Just a second. Yeah, is it visible? Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, yeah. So, this is, I think, a very well-known picture. Many of you may have already seen it. This is where I wanted to start, to show the importance and the stark criticality of caring. those of us who are the most vulnerable, our most vulnerable people and members of our communities are already caring in the best possible way they can for their children and for the vulnerable among themselves. But certainly it's not ideal for a child, for a baby to be on a mother's back when she's working at a brick kiln. And therefore, not only do we have to provide care infrastructure for the child, but also understand the difficulties of workers working in some of the most hazardous and difficult, challenging sectors, and ensure that we care for them in the ways that our society is geared up to do. Care is also something that falls as a burden disproportionately on women. And therefore, what we call meritocracy often forgets that the burden of all the little things, minutiae of care, the daily laundry, the daily cooking, the ironing, the ensuring that things get done on time, that a house gets run, is also part of care. And that's something we forget. And care is often associated with drudgery. It's associated with different kinds of daily routines. And it comes in the way of unilaterally focusing on what we call meritocratic work. And that's also something we need to keep in mind. This is a picture of a child in an Anganwadi. And the reason why I wanted to show this picture is because 30 years ago, a colleague of mine was showing me archival pictures from the ICDS. ICDS is one of India's largest care infrastructure programs. It's a program which is designed, and it's also a very complicated program, perhaps one of the 3 most complicated government programs in the country, because it has multiple objectives. It's a program run at scale, massive program, 1.4 million Anganwadis, and 28 lakh Anganwadi workers and helpers working on it, millions of children. But what I want to say is that apart from everything else, even the participation in this care infrastructure 30 years ago used to be very different. In those days, the pictures that I was looking at from the archives showed much fewer girl children in those pictures, much fewer girl children in the Anganwadis. So today, if there is this little girl is able to drink milk in an Anganwadi, it's because over the 30 years, a lot of people have worked to ensure inclusion and ensure enrollment, attendance, and retention in the Anganwadis. And that's why we are able to see progress in these fields. Despite all the challenges, we're able to see some progress in this today. Another picture I wanted to show. Again, this is a picture from of a street vendor in one of our districts in Karnataka. It's from a program of economic support for street vendors. But when I asked, so we think that, you know, government is providing this support, providing this and so on. But when I asked this lady, what makes you do this? It's difficult work. You have to go to the flower market, to the wholesale market very early in the morning. You have to bring your thela and bring the flowers, then sell it through the day, and then take care of the disposal and return your loans, all of that. She said, I'm doing this so that my daughter who's sitting next to me doesn't have to do this, so that she can go to school and she can go to college and she will not have to work in an insecure, informal sector later. So those of us providing care infrastructure, whether through the government or through civil society or through different private sector arrangements and so on, must first of all understand that what we're doing is adding, supplementing what families, our men and women in our communities are already doing. So we must approach the subject with humility. We must approach it with respect and with sensitivity, and with the recognition that what we are doing is not set out to replace the kind of care that a parent or a family member can give, which is more precious than anything else. And what we are doing is to add to that and support that. The other thing I wanted to very much emphasize is that care requires a life cycle approach. All of us need care from the time a child is born. In fact, before a child is born, the mothers need care, the families need care. And of course, the growing child in the womb also requires care. But from the time a baby is born, from conception till death and after death, families, people, individuals require care. It's not that care is only for children. Care is required for teenagers, for adolescents, for young people, for people who may be single, destitute, for whatever reason, different kinds of people with disabilities, people who are elderly. People require care in different forms, at different points in their lives, and therefore care requires a life cycle approach. Thank you for talking about the COVID vaccination program. These are two pictures from literally from the field. The picture on the left is from a rice field in Mandya, where our frontline workers who did amazing work vaccinated people even as they worked on the fields, and took the vaccination program to every nook and corner of the state and of the country. On the right, we have a woman being vaccinated. And we're very happy to say that the COVID vaccination program showed that not only is it desirable, which we all know, to reach everybody, but it's also possible. And it's made possible by a very sound technological platform, but also by frontline workers who don't give up on their efforts and who make amazing plans, micro plans, to reach every single vulnerable person wherever they are. And so COVID was one example of what we can do. We need to build on it. Childcare infrastructure is also important, not only as an instrumental, enabler for women's workforce participation, but for ensuring that children in our country get the best possible care, because they deserve it. They deserve it today, and they deserve it as future grown productive members of society. On the left is an Anganwadi worker with a child. Anganwadis, as you know, cater to children between 3 and 6 years of age. On the right is a new experiment that Karnataka is trying of Kusin Mane, which is children below the age of 3 don't have any physical care infrastructure right now. However, recognizing that this is an aspect which requires attention, Government of Karnataka this year has launched 4,000 creches, childcare centers for children below the age of 3, for children of Narega workers, where women childcare workers will be trained through mobile creches, and the panchayat will provide the space. This will cater to 120,000 children, providing support to over 100,000 families, as well as livelihoods to 40,000 women who will work as creche workers in these creches. This is an important step forward, because till now we have not actually made any interventions in this space at this scale, where children below the age of 3 have also been brought to daycare. But recognizing that this is an important enabler, both for women's workforce participation and for better safety, well-being, nutrition for children in those vulnerable years when malnutrition can set in. This is something that we're doing in Karnataka. It's also important to recognize that care is a very precious and special feeling and responsibility, which male carers also should be invited to participate in. Not only invited, but encouraged and supported to participate in. This is a picture from one of our libraries. We have these 6,000 rural libraries approximately, in which we have given free library cards to around 4 million children, rural children up to the age of 18. Now we're delighted to see that now that we have extended library timings on weekends, on Saturdays, Sundays, and also every day, 8 hours the library is open. We are delighted to see that on Saturdays and Sundays, not only do the children come, but many of their parents, grandparents, and especially the fathers come to the library with the child so that the child can borrow books. And this is a very special feeling because we see first generation learners, children whose parents may not be literate or maybe semi-literate, bringing their parents along and showing that this is an experience which they can share in. And therefore, we need to find ways to help male caregivers participate in the processes of caring. Care by the state can also manifest itself in different initiatives, such as Karnataka's free bus mobility program for women. This is an important picture from North Karnataka, where an elderly woman, whose name is Ningava, she said that, you know, I have repeatedly, she's from a reasonably less privileged family. And so she says, I have asked my children to give me bus fare. Every time I need to travel by bus, I need to ask one of my sons or daughters. And sometimes they don't give it to me. But now I can travel free by bus. And that, I think, is an example of how imaginative government policy can help to care for vulnerable citizens in the times of, and this is not new. There is free bus travel for senior citizens, especially is a tried and tested policy, which helps and enables seniors to be mobile in their old age in different countries. And so this is something which enables not only the elderly, but also young girls to go to school, go to high school, go to college, enables women to go to work, enables the elderly to be mobile and free. We should also remember care workers. Most of our care workers at the front lines, almost all of them are women. It's a highly feminized. Asha workers are all women. Anganwadi workers are all women. Anganwadi helpers are all women. Midday meal cooks and assistants are all women. And it's very, very important that we look after our care workers. This is an example of a picture of an Anganwadi helper. Not only is she given apron and cap, but also when we added to the work of the Anganwadis of providing hot meals to women, in addition to children, we said that we will move from single burner stoves to double burner stoves and give an additional pressure cooker so that it's a labor saving device. And that's an example of, again, an intervention, a policy intervention, which works and shows care for the burden of our frontline workers. And that's something that we can do. There are many other ways in terms of giving critical care illness cover, in terms of giving online applications, transparent application process, making their working conditions a little better. Everything doesn't have to be only on the basis of remuneration. There are multiple other ways in which we can make working conditions better for our frontline workers. Maternal care. This is an aspect where multiple programs, but required to do a lot on the last mile to ensure that this is an example of a picture from Yadgir. This lady is a worker on a building site. She's brought, this is our hot meal program for pregnant women and breastfeeding mothers. And she's brought not only her toddler who was below the age of 3 and therefore not attending the Anganwadi, but also a baby in her lap. And so she's able to have her meal and also share the egg and the part of a meal, of a freshly cooked meal with her child. So this is again an example of care in action, of policy interventions which can exemplify caring and support mothers in the part of caring that governmental policies cannot do, which only a mother can do or a parent can do. The final point I want to make is that care is inclusive, and care should recognize that lack of privilege is intersectional, poverty is intersectional, deprivation is intersectional, and we need to care especially for those who are more vulnerable because of disability or because of lack of caste privilege or because of multiple other reasons, ethnicity and remote access, tribal, forest-dwelling tribals, various others. This is an example, again, from a library where we have these 6,000 decentralized libraries at Panchayat level. So what we've done is not only are computers available, but also screen readers, audiobooks, and facilities with assistive devices for children with disabilities to come to the library, spend some time, and get both entertainment time in terms of stories and songs, but also learning resources, which are both online and offline. So these are just some examples of how the care that we need to provide can be provided in multiple ways through imaginative social policy on the ground. Yes, sorry, I added this at the last minute. This is one picture I wanted to share. This is a picture from a children's Gram Sabha. Karnataka has been having children's Gram Sabhas, children's assemblies at village panchayat level since the year 2006. But in the last 3-4 years, from 2019, we have made them into child rights Gram Sabhas, where children are encouraged to have an orientation about children's rights, including the right against being married off as a child. This is a picture from Bellary, where this young girl is actually talking about how she's being forced into a child marriage. And I find this picture very moving because it shows that the Child Rights Gram Sabha is actually a safe space where she felt empowered to share this, and she trusted that the people listening, the officers and the elected representatives, would take action and would listen and act in a sensitive manner. And I think it's possible for us to create these safe spaces, both physically on the ground, as well as through technology, where we allow young people to email us or send WhatsApp messages or make phone calls to helplines. And we have a protocol for responding for these. All these are possible in the 21st century, and these are things that we should do. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll stop there and look forward to listening to the others.
Thank you so much, Dr. Uma. This was really a wonderful way to, in a sense, set the tone for the discussion that is to follow. I mean, the examples that you've shared of progressive, policy making that takes into account the fact that care is a lifelong need, and what governments can do in terms of supporting the need of families through the examples that you shared were really encouraging. Hopefully, when we have time to discuss, I'd like to also ask you a little bit about how they tie in with existing community bonds and community structures. But before that, I'd like to invite our next speaker, Chirashri Ghosh, who is an integrator for ECD partnership and community engagement with mobile creches in New Delhi. Chirashri, please go ahead.
Thank you, Arashji. And I first of all, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on this very pertinent and important issue, building a more caring world and implication for the community. I will be speaking more into my experience working on the community from last 25 years. So my presentation will mostly, my examples will be quoted there. And to start with, we all know that care work is not only the child care, but it is elderly, disabled and ailing care. And care responsibility is both physical, psychological, emotional and developmental needs. But if we see the statistics that are not very encouraging or very good, only 2% of the global GDP are invested in the care economy. And we know the whole care burden and the care work, mostly unpaid care work is on the women's thing, and Uma ji has already talked about it. But as a monetization, we see 1.1 trillion hours a year are spent on the unpaid care compared to only 400 billion hours for the men. And this, if we enable, like the Karnataka government has taken, if other states and whole in India, the initiatives are taken, that would actually release women for the economic activity, and that would actually contribute to the 3 trillion USD to the global GDP, and it will create 43 million jobs. And now, slowly the demand for the care work, I am actually representing mobile creches. So I would just like to share the mobile creches as dream for the care thing in 54 years before. And now, after the 54 years, we see that the care work has really taken traction in the global arena, and slowly, because there are multiple reasons. One is the demographic transition, because we see that mostly the elderly people population is increasing, which need a child care. Urbanization, we know that 2030, by 2030, the 50% of our world population will be urban population, and in the urban, the whole social fabric doesn't have a very strong bond. So social fabric is not there. Therefore, the care need is been prevalent. And thirdly, most important is the climatic change. Nowadays, it also have increased the care burden due to the scarcity of water, food, rural food distress, and other care burden. So overall, we have seen that care is an important thing, but the whole investment on the care is very less. And slowly, we think that the time will come when the care work will be recognized. They will be actually given more traction to the whole policymakers. If we talk about the community engagement program, because today's the whole discussion is about the community, how we engage with the community on the care work. What I have experienced that when we enter in the community, we have to do the assessment part. Without the assessment, we cannot intervene in a very robust way. In the assessment, we have to do the stakeholder mapping. We have to assess the whole intersectionality of within the society. We have to see the how the things are working. Once the assessment is done within the community, then we have to start engaging and participating into their discourse. Without participating and engaging them, we cannot think of community engagement program. Once they start engage and participate, then collectively we have to work to prepare a plan of action with them. Once the action plan is prepared, and small initiatives really give a very good results. One, the whole start and end dates of the initiative are decided. It has been implemented. There should be time for review and reflect. Without the review and reflect in the community engagement program, we cannot take the lessons which we have learned in the community to take it into the next initiative. So the whole process for engaging, this is the process we actually have tested and piloted and seen that it is a huge potential if we actually follow this process. And I think Uma ma'am has already talked about, when we talk about the community, which is we have to talk about the intersectionality of social, economic, and religious and political, and the urban, rural, and tribal setup. Without looking into that, we cannot frame any program or design any program for the community. Third is what is the implication when we engage with the community? What are the advantages? We all know, because when we engage with the community, there are indigenous knowledge within the community. We should learn those indigenous knowledge. We should also see the diverse perspective and idea. We learn the diverse perspective and idea because they have the strength, experience, and knowledge of that community. And within participation of their in the development programs, we can see that the expansion is very easy. Once the community start engaging themselves within the program, they expand it into the large area, and the decisions making are more informed. And once they are part of those processes, the ownership and sustainability of the program works. And challenges we all know within the community, because we work for the marginalized community, the time poverty is an important challenge, because without that taking into consideration, we cannot design a program for the community, and it has to suit it accordingly, their comfort, their availability, because without their availability, we cannot design a program. And secondly is the resources. Third is the representation, because when we talk about the child care thing, we see that mostly the women are into the women's self-help group, all the protection group, child protection group, or the Anganwadi support and monitoring group, mostly the women is being represented. If we want that it has to be an community-led process, we have to involve youth, we have to involve men. Without that representation, it cannot work. So one of the challenge is that how to involve the youth and men. Mostly all the care intervention in the community work is been done by the women, and the governance structure is a huge potential and challenge also, because local governance structure has an potential. There are 73 third amendment which talks about the governance role and how we can leverage those things. It will really help us within the care thing. And conflict and disagreement, we know that within the community it is also not very easy to work. There are conflict and disagreement, and how we can minimize that, mitigate that, that would be an important thing when we engage with the community. I would like to just share my experience when we have worked in the panchayat in three districts of three states. One is the Jharkhand, Odisha, and Madhya Pradesh. And we have seen, we have learned about that, what are the areas where we can intervene. And we have seen that 11th schedule of Article 243G talks about 29 topics where there are alignment with the care economy. So we can align those topics, and we have built up and think of a community development program with them. And it has done in 2 years ago. Now the whole fund, how the fund flow is there, that learning has also, we have that Gram Panchayat has 70 to 85% fund allocation, block level have 10 to 25, and district level have 5 to 15. So if we know the whole allocation of fund within the panchayat level, we can work with them accordingly to plan more care work within that Gram Panchayat development plan. And this is the whole portal eGram Swaraj which has been done, and we have done the process. We started there with the awareness building, capacity building of the Gram Panchayat members, and both men and women. And we have seen in those districts where we have worked, there are allocation of fund on ECCB. And before that, we have done in baseline, we have seen that no budget has been allocated around the ECD. But after the intervention, it has shown that most of the budget, around 9% of budget of the total Gram Panchayat fund was allocated on ECD. So the things can happen, but it needs investment, it needs involvement in with the community at the sustain. This is the photographs of the Anganwadi center where the budget has been allocated for constructing the kitchen, separate kitchen for the Anganwadi in the Jharkhand Khuti district of Khuti block and this is the whole picture of a Jadutola village in Chhattisgarh where they have constructed a Anganwadi from the Gram Panchayat fund. But just I will take a pause and I will talk about what should be the strategy when we talk about community engagement around the child care thing. First, I think it is too much important that we should invest on the training. Without investment on the training and upscaling of the community leaders, recognizing their efforts, it cannot be done overnight, because it is a process, it is a journey, and training is a very important, very much important thing to be done. Secondly, involving men and youth, which I have already talked about, and whole responsibility to the community groups to plan, monitor, evaluate, and once they start planning and monitoring, then the things are much easier and it has a ripple effect. Last but an important thing, I just want to flag that most of the government program doesn't have tight fund for the community engagement program. Unless there is a tight fund, there is a allocated fund for the community engagement, like childcare, providing childcare or providing health services, they need a cadre of community, the community volunteers. Like community engagement also, it is a skilled work and it needs a special kind of professionalism if we want to engage with the community, and that needs fund. And without the provisioning of fund within the design of the government program, it will never work, and it will never be a sustainable program. So I think for the community engagement, there should be a tight fund within that. Once the fund allocation is there and there is a proper robust plan, the community engagement in the care work is not a difficult thing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chirashri. This was really a perspective that brought to the fore the role that communities in particular play, and the experience that you shared really helped us see where the areas of effort need to be in terms of strengthening the capacity of the community and supporting it in providing care. Thank you. I see we have a few questions already. I think a few are for Dr. Uma, and maybe both of you can share your thoughts. The first is what motivates frontline workers to do this work? Is it just economic reward? How does non-economic motivation be strengthened? The second one is how can government ensure that they don't weaken informal community structures that exist, which comes from cultural and spiritual beliefs of people? Then there's one particularly for Chirashri. What is experience of working either communities for care in urban areas? Are there any unique issues? I guess the question is because your description was talking of panchayats, and so is there also experience? So I open the floor now if you can share your thoughts.
Uma ma'am, you will be responding the first time. I can respond.
Yeah. So definitely, it's a very good question. What motivates frontline workers to do this work? Is it just economic reward? Certainly not, because most of them are paid, as we know, a limited amount. The work is complex. The work is challenging, and a lot of additional work sometimes ends up with them. However, at the same time, they live in the communities, and they are women who certainly need the remuneration that they get, both in terms of what is paid as an honorarium, and also many states like Karnataka and other states actually top up what the Anganwadi workers, helpers, Ashas are getting from state resources. For example, in Karnataka, Anganwadi workers were given honorarium, but also for every 5 years of additional experience, Anganwadi workers and helpers get an additional amount, because the states have recognized that their additional experience also is valuable. So certainly remuneration is important, like for all of us. They're also human, they also have needs. But also we need to recognize that they bring a unique community involvement to the table, and their intrinsic motivation comes from the desire to work for the children and for the mothers, for the breastfeeding mothers, for the pregnant women, for the adolescent girls, for the young children, and so on, in their own communities. So these are often women who come to this job with a unique communities as influencers. And so apart from all the things that we can do to smoothen out the issue of remuneration, to ensure that they are paid regularly and there are no delays, and ensure that they get some leave, which is possible, which is available, and maybe some other working conditions. Like in Karnataka, we brought an online system of recruitment so that they would not face harassment and so on. So those are different things that we can streamline on the matters of their working conditions. But I find that the tremendous what other word is there? The tremendous love that they bring, the tremendous amount of concern and care that they bring is a potential source of energy which we don't recognize. And if we treat their work with the respect and the attention that it deserves, we can actually use this intrinsic motivation of theirs to make them part of the big picture, which is what we did when we launched the Hot Meal program, Matru program for mothers, because that was a huge additional burden of work. And if we had just tried a top-down approach, saying that we think we are the experts, we think that we should do this for women because women's nutritional need during pregnancy is important. And so we should take this up, and you need to do this because we say so. Then that would have been a very limiting and very narrow way of approaching it. They would have done it because they are very professional as well. But it would have not brought the energy of the intrinsic motivation into the program. But making them part of the big picture, we even shared on YouTube and on SATCOM, online modes of training, we even shared pictures from the Harvard research on, on the size of a child's brain development, on child's MRIs of a baby at the age of 2 months or 3 months, the MRI of a brain of a child who was well nourished and of a child who was stunted, to show that this is the difference that your work makes. And by showing that and explaining it in ways that they could understand, we made them part of the big picture. And I think that is a very powerful way to bring their intrinsic motivation into the, not only to bring their intrinsic motivation into the program, but also to give their work the respect and courtesy that it deserves. So that is my response to the first question. The second question is also very interesting. How can government ensure that we don't weaken informal community structures? Certainly, that's something that we need to be very cognizant of. Any new program needs to be taken up in consultation with communities, not just through one-way sharing of information, but through a process of communicating and consulting and listening to them, hearing them about their concerns, trying to identify spaces, timings, locations, issues that are important. While we're launching the new creches as well, there is a process of consultation. Also, since I work in Panchayati Raj, we work with the local governance structures. So the Panchayat itself is made up of representatives who they have elected. Along with that, all the governance structures, the Anganwadi governance structure, has not the Anganwadi worker or the Panchayat president as the head. It is the parent of a child, the mother of a child, who is the head of the Anganwadi committee. Similarly, the school committee is chaired by a parent. And there are other members in the Anganwadi committee. There are other mothers, there are pregnant women. There is even a father, at least one father. Very often we have more than one father. There is a grandmother, because we recognize the role of we recognize that the Anganwadi and the creche are spaces that are not formal education yet. They are spaces, midway spaces between the family and the neighborhood on one side and the school on the other. And therefore, they need to be less formal. Suppose a grandmother is bringing, I have seen this in very many Anganwadis that I have visited. If a grandmother brings a child, age 3 years old, to the Anganwadi, and the child is crying the first few days, until the child settles, the grandmother will sit there in the Anganwadi through the day. And so these are ways in which we respect the involvement and the commitment and the particular sensitivity that parents, families, caregivers, and communities bring to the process. I'll stop here and hand over to Chirashri.
The third question, what's the experience working in the community in the urban areas? Yes, we have experience working in the urban areas, but around the care thing, it is more complex than the urban areas. Definitely, because in the rural area, the whole social fabric is very cohesiveness is there. But urban, you know that people from different states come, and it is difficult, but it is not. It is not impossible. It is possible. And in the Delhi, we have groups working with the care, and they are part of the networks where they raise voices for the young child issue. So it is possible. But the one thing in the community engagement program, we have to work together as a partner, and without long-term investment it doesn't work. If we think that in within the 6 months the result will come, it doesn't work. We have to work continuously, at least what my experience is there, at least 3 years is needed if you want that community take that ownership and take it forwards. So without that investment we cannot think of. But urban is definitely more complex than the rural.
Thank you so much. I just had a question building on your and Dr. Uma's earlier comments. How much are communities involved in identifying caring needs? You see, in other words, what is the mechanism in place? Is it that policymakers identify a need, then there is an educational process where communities are made conscious of it? That is one, but that is flowing top down. But then do communities also have a voice in terms of maybe their needs, their caring needs are very particular, very specific to their circumstances? Is there that kind of room where there is a consultation about what the needs are and how they need to be addressed? Because I also remember in Chirashree's presentation, she talked about local knowledge, local structures of governance. So clearly there are specificities involved I mean, there is the universal need, but then I'm sure there is context-specific ways in which those needs get manifested. And so I don't know if you all have any comments on this.
So on this, I would just like to say that there are two things about this. One is how such needs get articulated. It's very important for administrators, for local elected representatives from panchayats and so on, to keep these communication channels open. Gram Sabha is one area where there are extensive discussions. But apart from general Gram Sabhas, as I said, we also have children's Gram Sabhas, where children talk about areas that are important to them, thoughts that are important. And we have women's Gram Sabhas as well, where women are encouraged to talk about aspects of life and aspects of their life. So in these Gram Sabhas earlier, without a framework, these Gram Sabhas can end up just being wish lists. You know, this water tank in this school, or this toilet is not functioning. So that's important. It's important to make a list, a laundry list of actions to be taken up. But also it's important to do some very, blue sky kind of discussion. 45 minutes, 1 hour of what would we do if. So that is a process that we have started in Karnataka since the last 1 year, where we're not just making an action plan for the panchayat, at every panchayat, but we're also doing a 5-year vision plan. So once you start talking about a vision plan, then you start getting into areas where people can ask for things that are not yet there and imagine ways of, changing timings, doing things. What else can we do? Leaving space. So that is one part of it, making these conversations happen. The second is that everybody knows in government that nothing works on the ground unless it is discussed, unless communities also have an ownership, unless they understand what change it's going to bring. It's not something that can be just imposed. And we need to find in the guidelines a little bit of space within the framework. Government programs at scale need to have certain framework and certain parameters in order to be standardized across these things. But we need to find that little space where they can be contextualized for local conditions. For example, in Kodagu, if there is, the danger of human-animal conflict or wild animals moving around in the evenings or very early maybe we want to change timings, library timings you want to change, something like that. So that's just one example. Maybe change bus timings, maybe change library timings. These are all in certain areas where there might be this issue. Leaving that also is important for programs to work on the ground. Chirashri?
No, I totally agree with you. There has to be within the design, the provision and space, how to involve the community thing. So I think in the every design within the government program, it has to be standardized, what Uma ma'am told. Without that into a place, it will not happen. It doesn't happen. There has to be and recognized space within the government structure. Unless that space is there, it will not happen. It will happen where Uma ma'am is there. She is very, very, she has taken so good step in the Karnataka, but everywhere there is not there. If it is part of the design, it will be happening as a standardized process. But if it is not part of the design and we are not involving, recognizing and remunerating the whole frontline workers, it will not happen. It is my assumption.
Thank you, Chirashri. We have another, too many of our questioners are anonymous. Maybe they can also start giving their names. So another anonymous comment, I feel the question someone asked on existing informal care network based on their spiritual and cultural ties is quite important to address in much detail, as I feel it is at the heart of the issue here. Government policies and development programs no doubt are helpful, but as long as the community is not seen as an active protagonist of reformulating and building their own consciousness so as to take charge of their own development, any effort will die down in the long run. What do the panelists think about this?
I totally agree with this. Unless it is their priority, it will not work. And unless they take the responsibility to do it, only the government programs will not work. So it is very much important that community take the ownership. Community is been recognized to take those ownership, and there is an possibility in the design form. And once any program will only be successful where the community has taken those decisions and communities has taken the ownership to take it forward.
Yes, I totally agree. I think whether one calls it spiritual or community or democratic space, it's all about not ceding that space and participating in that civic space to take decisions and to express one's own agency, one's own aspirations and one's own agency. Often somebody will come to me and say, something XYZ is this timing or this thing is not working in my panchayat. Can you get this done? Or in my library, can you get it done? And I'm like, you should go and ask in your panchayat. You should ask them. You have voted for them and you need to raise your voice over there. It's not that I can send a top-down instruction and make it happen. Of course, that's one way to do it, but that's not a sustainable way to do it. So it's important for that civic space to be full of energy and to be open for discussion and conversation.
Thank you so much. I think one question that comes to my mind, but maybe we'll take it up later, is also what happens in cases where the state is not as progressive or as enlightened as, the examples we are discussing, how does the community then, fill in that void and continue to provide for the needs of its member? But before going into that, I think it's time to invite our next speaker and to listen to her comments. Our next speaker is Mubashira Zaidi. She is a research fellow and program lead at the Institute of Social Studies Trust. Mubashira, welcome. Please share your thoughts.
Fine. So I'm basically going to speak a lot to my previous, the previous speakers in the panel, and a lot of discussion on the questions that were coming to the panelists. The presentation is based on a study that we conducted at ISST in 2021, actually, to capture what happened in the community, especially in urban settings during the lockdown period. What happened when the state structures are collapsing? So how did the community respond? So maybe I'll try to answer those some of those questions that have come up. So we're all aware of what happened during that time, but just to recall, we know that our government has a lot of social protection schemes and initiatives to address health risks, vulnerabilities, unemployment, poverty, and largely for working class citizens belonging to informal sector. And these schemes, these social protection initiatives were put to test during the sudden and the complete national lockdown. The schemes especially that came into focus were the PDS scheme, the public distribution system, also the ICDS. Dr. Uma spoke about it. And these schemes come under the National Food Security Act of 2013, which does not guarantee universal access. It requires a certain, criteria to be proven, some documentary evidences to be able to access it. So we saw large segments of the population, especially the migrant workers or even single women, who were excluded from these schemes. And in a scenario where there was a complete lockdown, there was a widespread panic. Here we're talking about informal settlements. We're talking about urban slums in this study where people were not protected by social security schemes or social protection, and they did not have savings. They were daily wagers. They were so there was widespread havoc and panic, and we've seen all of that. And it proved to be quite disastrous for these informal settlements. So when the social protection coverage was faltering and it was struggling to provide for the informal sector or the people in the slum areas or underprivileged people, the non-state actors stepped up, the community stepped up. And these were individual volunteers, community leaders, different kinds of people. So we're going to discuss about that. Our main research question was basically to understand what were the different motivations and processes and negotiations, who were the nonprofit or who were the community who were acting as being active citizens in that scenario, or who were the affected population. And also the study, the main idea was also to recognize the important contribution of the community, especially during a crisis situation. Briefly to talk about the conceptual framework, we're looking at what you spoke about initially, Dr. Fazli, about social reproduction theory and how, we looked at community processes of care as an act of social reproduction, where not only we're nurturing people as labor power for capitalism, but also we're nurturing society. So we looked at that theory. We included that. But importantly, we were looking at the concept of crisis of care that Nancy Fraser talks about, where she talks about a deep-seated contradiction in capitalism, where on one hand, it is completely dependent on these social production activities, life-making activities, but at the same time destabilizes social reproduction. We also looked at the care diamond to understand the care economy here. So we're not only talking about the state and the market, where the focus of literature is, and also the family, to understand how women are burdened with care. But he wanted to also include, the care diamond includes a community where sometimes the literature or the research is not focused on. We haven't studied a lot about how the community provides care, and we're trying in this research to contribute to that literature. And we see that there were in social protection schemes similar aspects of neo-capitalist perception, where people are seen as poverty, or social protection schemes are seen as a drain on the national exchequer. So there are these ideas from capitalism that we incorporate in our lay understanding. Our methodology was qualitative, and we used a case study methodology where we looked at 4 slum communities in Delhi: Yamuna Khadar, JJ Colony, Bhawana, Sanjay Camp, and Seelampur. We conducted 122 in-depth interviews across these 4 sites. And since this was a COVID time, we could not go there personally, but we had local facilitators who helped us in doing telephonic or digital interviews. These were our sites, and we selected these sites trying to look at different, have a certain variation or differentiation in the selection. So Yamuna Khadar, which is a highly vulnerable area, and which experiences frequent demolitions. There were also floods recently here in the near the Yamuna. And the Seelampur area, which is another slum community, but there were widespread communal experiences, houses and shops burned, and this happened just before the lockdown, the Delhi violence. There is Bhawana, which is inhabited largely by daily wages, and there was widespread joblessness at that time. There are a lot of factory workers there, and factories that manufacture firework and plastics and stuff like that. So it's environmentally hazardous for the community. Sanjay Camp, again, is a cramped urban slum inhabited by daily wagers, domestic workers, just like any other urban slum area. And understandably, the public infrastructure was very poor in all of these areas. Here, wanted to emphasize that often shocks or crises are seen as externally imposed, like COVID-19 coming and externally bringing those shocks. But we wanted to emphasize that the shocks are actually coming internally, from internal structures, from internal vulnerabilities and inequalities. And those are, exaggerated or become aggravated when such crisis experiences happen. So we saw that there was, we will remember how there was overcrowding and long queues to even access basic public facilities like water, and how women and girls were highly exposed because they were the ones who were primarily responsible for collecting water, or even lining up at the PDS stores were largely women. Housing became a major issue, especially for migrants and tenants, and due to their inability to pay rents. And you talked about kinship relationships, how migrants felt that despite certain measures being taken by the government, they had to return to their villages because social reproduction was being provided by kin relationships there. Also, we saw some intersectionality here in terms of how women or single women or elderly women will be getting discriminated in trying to access social protection schemes by the state. Also, very interestingly, because communal violence had just happened in Delhi, how the minority community was, because many of the frontline workers wanted identification cards, Aadhaar cards, and they were not willing to share those because they thought they will be targeted again. So these were the kind of experiences that you were seeing. I wanted to highlight those here. So who were the community members that you're talking about in this study? Some community leaders who become leaders by their social position. There were also community-based organizations, youth-based organizations that were existing in those areas. There were also Mahila Panchayats. One of the NGOs that you were working with were Action India. And they had, since many years, have been working in these slum communities and have managed to bring together women into Mahila Panchayats. There were also non-profits, other kinds of NGOs. There were also, we also looked at other actors like political actors, religious religious leanings, and all those kind of actors as well, and also the affected population, who were the people who were receiving this relief work. Just wanted to also highlight what were the key aspects, or the benefit that people in the non-state or those functionaries who were there existing in the community had, and that helped them during in providing relief work. One was because these people lived in the same community, they were very familiar with local conditions and what were the requirements of the community. There was a whole decentralized approach, and because of the decentralized approach, there was a creation of a web of relation. There were volunteers that were coming and joining these organizations. We talked about, because of this local knowledge and understanding of different people's needs, there was an integration of different kinds of relief work that was needed. There were instances where migrant workers were falling short of cash. So cash was given to them, even though food was provided by the state, dry ration by, through PDS. People did not have cooking fuel, so they provided cooking fuel. So they knew, they understood the different needs of the community. So the context is really important. Because of existence of NGOs and the training around documentation and all of that, so they did have an understanding of the importance of creating systems of documenting. Of course, there were challenges, what Chirishri also mentioned, a lot of backlash from the community, because there was this Hindu-Muslim dynamic, which is very raw and fresh at that moment. We also saw the non-state frontline workers, although belonged to Mahila Panchayats and NGOs and belonged, and worked in that community as social workers. Despite that, they had to negotiate far more with their family because of the unpaid care responsibilities to be able to continue their work. There were a lot of people who, in the affected population, demonstrating hesitation and shame in accessing, which shows that the kind of relief, the manner in which the relief work was provided could be made more dignified or respectful. Also, the issue of lack of coordination between the state and non-state actors. For instance, Anganwadi workers did not have the autonomy to share information on, young mothers or young children. So identifying vulnerable population could have been easier if there was collaboration between. But there was greater social recognition and understanding that sometimes the state is absent, but the community is present. There are actors in the community that provide the much needed help. We also try to understand what was the language that was being used by the community people. There was a question on motivations and how and why were they doing this. In terms of the characteristics of care, we realize that it is labor intensive, because the social protection schemes they provide, they work in a manner which says one size fits all or first come, first serve. But here you're realizing there is a personal touch, a human touch that was needed in providing care, and therefore it was quite labor intensive. Also that there is a relationship between the carer and caree, and the product that comes out of that is dependent on how and what is the subject position of both these individuals and entities. So it is, can be very different for different kinds of people. Also that it is interactive. What we really found important was the subject position of the carer. Because these people existed and many of them were trained in providing social work, they could immediately act. Our assumption initially was that there will be many women because traditionally they are carers of the family. They will also come out in the community and start helping, but that did not really happen. The people who were providing care were largely men and young men. Women were also present, but women were those who were trained as, as NGO workers or were in Mahila Panchayats or had some association. So what Chirashri was saying was the importance of training and exposure to community and providing help in the public is important. It does not come naturally to anyone. It requires that kind of training. Also, there was a lot of sense of culture and religiously oriented sense of providing care. There was an expression of Ashirvad milega, ya duas milengi, and there was also a difference in understanding or why care was being extended. Women talked about an extension of family. My community is an extension of family. Men talked about, this was a stark difference that we found in all the 4 settings. Men talked about how they want to be useful. Because they're unemployed right now, they want to be useful, for the larger good of the society. So there was a difference in the perception. To talk about lessons, what are we learning from this kind of community work, and if we can draw for the civil society, want to continue working in the community or even the state, and what we can draw from those actions is one is that universality. But within a universal approach, we needed those targeted techniques because there were people who were much more vulnerable. Even in an urban slum like Yamuna Khadar, it wasn't a homogeneous society. There were deeper areas, more remote areas, which are called jungle areas, where people, could not access relief. Also proactive identification procedures rather than providing social protection schemes and expecting the affected population to come and access is something that the state is largely doing. And here we saw that there was a proactive mechanism by which these people were being identified. The context was really important, and that came out and the local knowledge, the understanding of what these social dynamics are and social positions and power dynamics are was quite important. And not just gender, but also intersectionality is key in understanding. Of course, also regular updates in understanding who the vulnerable is, because depending on the situation, the vulnerabilities of people change. There are opportunities for certain people while certain other people become more vulnerable. In terms of the strategies used were both combining cash and food. Also, psychosocial support came out as really important, which also in terms of criticizing the community approach, one was that there was a lot of altruism, that we want to do good for the society, which became burdensome for the non-state frontline workers, but also for those who were receiving that, because they were seen as beneficiaries, they were seen as those who were needy. Here we needed a rights-based approach where people are engaged and they are given that information, they're given resources to access assistance. What was very key is that the need for collaborations was missing between state and non-state. There was a lot of mistrust between the two, which needs to be, the trust needs to be cultivated for effective crisis response. And lastly, because in the study, it came out so strongly, social cohesion is really important if we want to talk about care. We saw that, because the social bonds were weak, there were problems, there were challenges in providing very critical care to people. And so unless the community does, there is a dark side to the community, but we're right now talking about the good side of the community, and who were trying to build those bonds. But without the government endorsement, this cannot be sustained. And the government needs to understand that that this is key. And the care infrastructures include the community, and the community needs to be strengthened. The non-profits needs to be provided those resources and training, and more women can be involved because they bring in a very key gender perspective and their life experiences to the whole care dimension. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bashira. This was really a wonderful analysis. I think it really helped us all understand the nuances and the more granular picture of what it means to engage communities and what kind of needs and possibilities exist for drawing on communities, and the in a sense both the challenges that come with it and also the potential that it provides for addressing the needs of care. Thank you for. I'm sure we'll have a lot to discuss in a couple of, after Martha's comments. So I'd like to invite Martha now. Martha Mogbalpur is with the Office of Social Action of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of India.
Thank you so much. It's such a delight to really be in this webinar, and all the discussions have been so insightful. I'll just try to add some points just to build on all of that was already shared based on the insights that have been trying to gather from Baha'i-inspired community-led initiatives of social action. The Office for Social Action, it tries to learn about how geographical communities in either urban neighborhoods or in villages, how they're gradually taking charge of their own spiritual and material development. And really at the heart of it, it's capacity building of individuals, of institutions, but also of the community, and trying to learn how to strengthen the relationships between each of them. And one of the ways that it's being tried is there's so many Baha'i-inspired educational programs for all ages, which are open for people of all backgrounds, and it really aims to build capacity for service by drawing knowledge from both sacred writings, but also from the different fields of human endeavor. So really, even though the experiences that I'm drawing from are from all around the country, but they're very modest and humble experiences, and these geographical communities are engaged in this process, knowing that this is an intergenerational learning process, that we have to figure out all the questions that really, as each of the panel members shared, the challenges that are there. The question really is, as even the background note mentioned, the question of how can caring and egalitarian and inclusive communities be developed in urban neighborhoods or in villages that build solidarities across social, economic, and religious divisions, and really avoiding segregation, but also fostering the intermixing of people of all backgrounds. And also this other question that was mentioned was, how can supporting the care and development of vulnerable segments of the population in a community, such as children and the sick, become a long-term avenue for civic engagement, so that everyone's really committed to it? I feel like these are really big questions. And as everyone shared, there's actually, the pandemic was such a horrifying experience for everyone. Though it really helped us to observe and learn a lot about what it means for a community to be resilient, what it means for, in various circumstances, when we saw there were communities that they could come together, they could sacrificially support one another, but there were also communities where we could see that people felt estranged and were not able to come forward. Many of the communities that I'm closely serving with, one thing that really stood out personally for me was the role of youth. And that's something that even Chirashiji and Mubashir also mentioned, that it was so fascinating in places, in communities where already certain conditions were created, where certain capacities had already been built, certain relationships had been strengthened. When the crisis came, these youth, they actually arose selflessly and volunteered to assist one another in the most scary circumstances. Like, for example, during the first wave, there was a lot of fright and distress, but they made sure like to visit one another, to call families in the community. And then that could range from their own tola to like the entire village, like, so people were in different subsections. Then there were so many families with limited material means that needed access to the government schemes and programs, which are being provided, but they either didn't know of it, they didn't know how to access it. So they were really the link. They would regularly visit to ensure whether everyone had medicine, food. They also, the closure of schools, it was fascinating how they created these small tutorial classes in their gully for their neighbors, for the kids and adolescents of their neighborhood, to help them with studies. And in a place where there was so much doubt and distrust, it was that time also, and people weren't really, even though like, as the state was trying, the ASHA workers were trying to really ensure that everyone gets vaccinated, it was many times this distrust and doubt. And as we were sharing, there's this lack of trust between the state and non-state actors. But really it was these youth, because they already had these, relationships of friendships with these other families, that when they stepped up and when they spoke to families about raising awareness about the importance of, let's say, vaccination or how to help the elderly, then people stepped up. And there's so many examples, but like also when so many returned from cities to villages, economically, there were so many strains that families were going through. So being resourceful, being creative in terms of finding alternative sources of income, creating kitchen gardens, or, it really was this sincere concern and this vibrant ingenuity in a way that the youth showed, and this concern for the vulnerable in the community, for the children, for the adolescents, for the elderly, that also then inspires action, inspires everyone to act. I just wanted to then share that based on these broad observations, we could see that there's certain conditions that maybe are crucial for a resilient community. And there can be all sorts of crises, and even beyond crisis, for a community to thrive and really prosper, not just materially, but in socially and culturally, in every way. So one thing that really stands out is this condition, which is an environment of mutual support and trust, where there's the sense of goodwill, there are these friendships between families and individuals across different social and economic backgrounds. And really this need for, there's a quote which says, the supreme need of humanity is cooperation and reciprocity. The stronger the ties of fellowship and solidarity amongst men, the greater will be the power of constructiveness and accomplishment in all the plans of human activities. So while that's one condition, another two, just because of the limited time, was this culture of, if a culture of service is created, where everyone really is inspired to be of service to one another in whatever form, but really cultivating that culture also enables resilience. Another condition, if we see, is really if a collective is engaged in a mode of learning, to really be humble and open to recognize that there's so much that we need to learn, that, let's say, the development of a community, this path is something that it's not that another group of people will come and do it for us, but it's really, it's a path that we need to navigate and explore through this process of learning, through this process of generating new knowledge and trying to share with one another. And every community has a very unique path to take. And of course, there can be some patterns and insights that we can draw across communities. So then I was reflecting that if, let's say, these three conditions, the condition of like mutual support and trust, this a culture of service to be there, and for this and mode of learning to really be inculcated, then how do we do this? How do we bring this about? And as everyone shared, there are these challenges that are there that, you know, is if you look at the current conditions, there's so much, practically there's so much individualism that the current structures propagate. You know, there's apathy towards one another. There's this pessimism that, oh, kuch nahi hoga, nahi ho sakta hai. There's people are, you know, there's distance between people. There's lack of belief in others, but also in ourselves, that main kya kar lungi, what can I do? Some, you know, the state has to do something. Or so really in that condition, then, so I just thought of 3 points to share about how we could, maybe what are some ways in which these conditions can be created. And it really shows that it's a capability. To create these conditions, we have to raise capacity, as everyone was sharing, that training or capacity building or cultivating certain capacities and capabilities will allow for a community to have certain conditions that enable care, that enable the needs of everyone to be met. So the 3 capabilities that that stood out was the first being really the capacity to be able to raise consciousness in the community through communication and dialogue. So it can start with some, maybe one individual or a couple of individuals, and gradually it grows into this group of initiators who are thinking very actively about how to gradually change the patterns that are there in a community. Maybe there's a pattern of thought, there's a pattern of behavior that we get used to and we accept, but really, if we, through informal conversations, it starts with simple conversations that we have on a day-to-day settings. It's also through visiting one another in homes and trying to uplift the conversations that we're having. So many of the youths that the communities that I'm following, they're involved in certain informal educational programs that really provides them a space to rethink conceptions and concepts. For example, let's say about education. We want to enhance the process of education in the community. So how do we really view children? Are they empty vessels that we need to fill, or are they, as there's a quote from the Baha'i writings which says, regard man as a mind rich in gems of inestimable value. Education can alone cause it to reveal its treasures and enable mankind to benefit therefrom. So really to see every child as a mind rich in gems. Every child has so much potential, but it's really the community and families that need to come together to nurture it and cultivate it. But even just to have conversations in families, in groups of families, in various settings to discuss this, it really enables consciousness to be raised, to even discuss about what's the purpose of education, and how is it just to get a job, but really how can education be a means to which we can assist and enable the community to advance. So really through these dialogues and regular communication, which is very systematic, and it really helps in deepening certain convictions that actually change is possible, and this is the kind of change that we can try to aspire. And we learn the skill of really also listening to one another, being patient, being accommodating, and so there's a whole web of capacities, skills, qualities that we need to develop. So I'm drawing from experiences from different communities around the country. Like what I was sharing right now was from this community in rural, in UP, where really these group of youth started coming together and really try to build these bonds of friendship between families. And through these conversations, they also then were inspired to to initiate acts of service. So like they can be very small, but it's coming from their own heart and initiative. So for example, they were worried about adolescents playing too much video games and not paying attention to studies. And so they decided, why not, let's do something constructive. So they decided to make kitchen gardens in their homes. They also saw that many children in their community were dropping out of school or weren't going to school regularly. So they started really having these conversations with their families, trying to see what kind of support they can provide, tutorial support, or some even mothers were eager that, well, actually even I want to learn. So they started small literacy classes, and also like to collaborate and bring everyone together, cleanliness drive, so that everyone thinks about the environmental needs of the community. So, but also further on, as time spent was over 10 years, now we see that their capacities are being developed. Now during the pandemic, they thought of actually the needs of everyone. They said not everyone has the books that are needed for higher education. So they pooled in all the books and they created a community library, and to be able to create a space where everyone can come together and they can learn from one another. So really, it starts from maybe this very simple capability, but it's very profound of how to raise consciousness through communication and dialogue. Another capability I was thinking is also, which is linked, is the capacity to read reality, to describe what is the current condition in our community, and to be able to consult and take collective action. So, so for that, again, we see there's a spirit of, sadly, there's an environment of competition, this emphasis on self-interest that really takes most of the attention. But to see how we can create new trends by supporting one another, by prioritizing the needs of others. And also the third thing I wanted to connect was the need for creating spaces that, again, Umaji and Chirashiji were mentioning in terms of the various Gram Sabhas for women, for children. Like, these are kind of spaces, but also their parents' gatherings or community gatherings, or let's say camps and festivals. And there can be so many settings where the whole community or sections of people can come together to really be inspired and realize there's so much that's already happening, to recognize that. I feel often that is overlooked, to recognize what's happening, but also what can happen and what possibilities that are there. What are some simple initiatives that all of us can come together to do to enhance change? So even as it was shared, the state has so many programs and schemes, but what can the community do to assist, let's say, the Anganwadi Didi, the Asha Didi, in the efforts that they're doing? And there are many examples, like for example, in Tamil Nadu, in this village, where one of these educational programs, which is the Junior Youth Spiritual Empowerment Program, it's being implemented. It was groups of junior youth, which is adolescents, come together, and they've been trying to read the reality needs of their community, and they've conducted very simple service projects. And even though it starts very simply, like let's clean the gully, but then it really inculcated this conversation with parents. After a couple of months, parents also got involved in terms of how can we set garbage cans, for example, in the lane. Then the school principal saw what they're doing, the government school principal, and he needed some support to enhance the school campus. So again, these adolescents and youth, along with the Gram Panchayat, came together to ensure that there's the drinking water for the children is good enough. They cleaned water tanks. This is over like 2-3 years, but very gradually, you can see as they engage in conversations, as they have spaces where consciousness is raised, they really are mobilized to also take action. And as they also take action, it further raises consciousness of everyone, and it invites participation of everyone. And gradually, this conviction also grows that we all can contribute, and we all have a role to play. So I think I'll just leave it at that for now, but it's really helpful to see that all the common threads that were going across the presentations, and the challenges are real, but also what are some alternative capabilities that we can enhance to create conducive conditions in the community to bring about change. So, yeah.
Thank you, Martha, for this very inspiring presentation, which shared many hopeful, in a sense, possibilities and examples, illustrations of purposeful communities or groups that begin to draw on the power of community to address the caring needs of each other and basically build a better society. So friends, we have questions. The first one, which I think is also addressed to our earlier two speakers, is from Pritam Nayak, who says, what about they, in inverted commas? Instead of understanding what the package is, how it will benefit them, they are enabled to raise capacity in some ways through long-term efforts so as to generate their own knowledge and figure out ways to address questions of care. I think they here, he means the community, people in the community. The state can definitely be of help in many ways, but it's not a simple question of ownership, I feel, because ownership of what? The program that someone else is making. So would someone like to respond? I don't know. This question of ownership was also discussed by Dr. Uma and Chirashri. So I think any of the panelists, if you all would like to take this, and then we move to the next.
Agree. I think the ownership is there because it is the community. When we frame a program, it is with them. when the community program is being planned with them, then it is their program and it is affecting most the community staying there. When we realize when within the community the program is designed for them, so and they are part of this process in consultation, then they start to own that project. Once if it is a very top down thing, they will never think that it is their project. Once when the need assessment and whole things is done with them and it is their problem, our problems, and when it become them and our problem, the ownership begins. And ownership has to be in the both sides, the program which has been launched there and the community. If any civil society organization starting the program, if they have to also take the ownership of the program, and the community it has to be like a partnership kind of thing, then only it happens. And it doesn't happen overnight. I think it takes a process. It is a journey. It is a consultative thing. Regular engagement is required to build those ownership.
Would anyone else like to share anything on this, or we move on?
If I may add, I would just like to, I'm in just agreement with Jayashree to say that even in our study, we observed that although there were these different actors, concerned citizens involved in relief work, they did not come from suddenly emerge. You know, these desired, aspirations to be there for the community or motivations were historical. They were cultivated. They were there even when there were other crises happening, or they were there on regular times also. So the Mahila Panchayats, for instance, of Action India, they've been there, going about every day, addressing everyday crisis. So there is this trust within the community. There is this ownership of Mahila Panchayats, for instance, which has happened over a period of 10 to 20 years, So it is cultivated and does not, especially in urban scenarios where it is, where people come and mostly they are migrants, these community bonds are cultivated over a period of time, especially if there are community-based organizations and NGOs, and we need to support these initiatives to build that ownership.
Okay, the next one is for Mubashira. It says, Mubashira ji, how far could conclusions of your study be extended to middle class or upper middle class areas in urban areas? I think most of the sample that you selected was informal setting. Is it, in other words, is it just a characteristic of those who are highly marginalized and living in a state of precarity, or could one, scale it, the conclusions?
The upper middle class or the more privileged classes here were, they had those kinship-related bonds. They were within the family where other frontline workers or delivery mechanisms were available to them, and they were happier within their own setting because they had the means. Here in urban slums, families lived in houses which are really small, and the community is an extension of the family. The family is larger, and there had to be. There had to come about. It was natural for families to help each other and such things to emerge. But I would like to add that the upper middle classes did come. The concerned citizens did, come in large numbers to help the marginalized, and those were the RWAs, for instance, or connections that they made through their working class people coming to their communities, for instance, domestic workers or other, staff that clean their societies, for instance. Where there was concern, there was definitely action. for the marginalized. So we did see that a lot of funding also came about, a lot of in-kind contribution came about, because I mean, otherwise the communities that we are talking about here in the study could not have managed on their own. The resources were extremely limited. There had to be outside resources that, that came in, which was from these kind of people and organizations.
Thank you, Mubashira. The next question, I think, how can cultural and social norms be changed to normalize and encourage men to see care as something positive? I guess one could ask, maybe a little bit drawing also what Martha was sharing, which is how can developing caring capabilities become an aspiration? Not a lot of the discourse views it as a burden, which I think is justified. I mean, there is drudgery, there's injustice, there is, but it is also possible to envision that in a more just, equitable world, one would still need to be caring in so many ways, and really to. So in that sense, as a characteristic of a well-developed human being with a strong moral fiber, how can especially men view this, not just, I mean, this is what I'm adding. Of course, the question is just asking how can it, but perhaps one can also ask this in terms of how can they aspire to this, not just view it as a burden and as a corrective to a historical injustice, while that is the case, but also go beyond. So I think it's open, whoever would like to respond to.
If I may add, I mean, we're looking at care here more as a social organization of care within the family, where women are burdened with care, and also within the state, where women are taken on as volunteers, even when they're doing more than full-time work. Because again, we're looking at gender norms where women are seen as carers, and it comes very naturally to them. But we also, when we're talking about the care infrastructure, we're talking about the care industry, there are a lot of oppressed classes, marginalized groups, men who are involved in providing care. So for instance, municipalities involved in cleaning our drainage system or sewage, there are a lot of men involved. There are, there is a lot of drudgery there as well. The entire care sector is actually affected with low and poor infrastructure, lack of poor, where Shirish talk about just, the GDP and how just 2 or 3% is being put in, invested in care infrastructure. Unless and until we look at care infrastructure or the life-making processes, give more importance to life-making processes than profit-making processes, we cannot create those aspirations for for caring roles. I think broadly, we need that kind of approach within our societies to say that caring roles are important and are not only limited to caring for a child. There is a larger society that is being cared for, and a lot of burden falls on the women and also on the marginalized classes and castes. So that, I mean, we need to bring those elements in the discussion as well.
Thank you, Mubashira. Would anyone else like to share anything on this? Okay, so the next question asks, there's so many questions in anonymous, it's hard to know which. Maybe because in this case, the women are not present because they. Okay, do communities also have a sense of agency? If so, how can we make sure it is guided along egalitarian, inclusive, and progressive lines? Because clearly we do see communities rising up, but like Mubashira was sharing in her presentation, often it can be misguided. So kind of also what Martha was saying, which is it's possible to, to raise consciousness through conversations. So how does that happen? Like I don't know if whoever would like to respond to this. Can the sense of agency of a community be guided on positive lines?
I think it is very context specific into different community, and we have to see how it start with dialogue and what Martha was also talking about. Without sitting, discussing, awareness building and information sharing, it will not happen, and it will take the process take times. It will not happen within a month or within a year. It takes process, and sometimes when we work in the community, we see we have gone 5 steps ahead, but again something happened, and again the community is back to one. So how to motivate continuously so that they think that it is their problem, and how collective things can be happen, it takes time, and I think it can only be done by continuous engagement there and continuous awareness building, information sharing. That are the only processes when we can see that community start thinking.
Thank you, Chirashri. The next 2 questions I think are for Martha. The first one says culture of learning and service is very important, but who will do it? Gandhi tried it in the past. Is it the government? Is it schools? Or is it NGOs? I mean, this thing of the culture of service that you were talking about, it is very much something that different social reformers and spiritual thinkers have initiated. But how does one sustain this? And then culture of learning also you mentioned. So I don't know if you have. Then the next one is, I think it's, okay, so the last question is kind of related to it. It says the capability that Martha was talking about seemed to be existing in the youth who took initiative from the very beginning. I'm curious to know how the initial initiative of a group of youth took place so as to make them ready for times of crisis, or even for sustained long-term working for their own community. What motivated them? How do they keep it sustained? So kind of related to the other question. And then the third question, which maybe you can, I don't know if you want to address them together. The third question says, Martha ji, most communities are just motivated by everyday issues. Who will take initiative to build capacity? Maybe she can respond, but also we can hear from the other panelists, because I'm sure all of you have thoughts on this. Martha, would you like to go first? This is for you, these questions.
Sure. I think these are really big questions. And I think that is the question that we need to learn about. And really, as you were saying, who does it, the government or the people? I think in a way, as everyone was sharing, it's really a web of relationships. It's individuals, institutions, community, even let's say from the individual, then we say we have the family, then we say there's the extended family. Then we talk about institutions from schools and healthcare to governance, but all of the relationship in between. I guess it really requires like a shift in thinking from just as just thinking in terms of some are who provide care. They are the frontline, caregivers, and others are beneficiaries. So how do we move beyond that and really see every member of the community, every individual institution as that they have a role to play? And I guess it's hard because, again, the question comes that, well, communities are busy with day-to-day things and we don't have the time, and, and how do we do that? I guess then really the question is the day-to-day work that is required. How can that be done with a different spirit, with a higher consciousness that let's say, even if I'm a 15-year-old who's studying, how do I view my life? What's the purpose of my life? If let's say service is at the heart of everything I do, the choices that I make, what I study, who I spend time with, what I speak about, who I marry, what kind of career I choose. So if all of that is really inspired by, let's say, a twofold purpose of life, that it's not just for me to think about my own private growth, which is very important, my spiritual, intellectual, social development, but also that is very much interlinked with the collective and the advancement of the community and of society as a whole, and how these are two interconnected. I guess there's certain shifts in thinking about the individual, but also the relationship with everyone that might need to happen, that will inspire and say, well, actually all of us, each one of us, even if we give a couple of hours a week, have the power and potential to do it. And I guess that's why the importance of creating spaces, I feel like, was as another capability, to create certain spaces, informal, formal, which are uplifting, which are inspiring, for everyone to think about what they're doing in their lives and how they can do it better. So it can be very simple things, but how do we enhance it? How do we improve it? But I would like others to share, and then I could add some more.
Thank you, Martha. Would any of the other panelists like to share on this point? Yes, Dr. Uma, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, on the matter of capacities of communities, one of the things we learned in the COVID pandemic, and I think this is not true just of Karnataka, but across the country, in rural India and rural areas, we have talked, this is now the 30th year of the 73rd Amendment. And there are panchayats across the country, more than 2.5 lakh panchayats, gram panchayats across the country. And many of us who believe in democratic decentralization have talked about capacities, the need for capacities, do they have the capacities, and so on. But clearly during the COVID pandemic, when there was no time for the luxury of discussing about capacities, the panchayats themselves came forward and took up the initiative and showed that they had the inherent capacities. So did the communities. At the front lines, what happened in Karnataka was that we set up these Gram Panchayat level task forces where local elected representatives as well as Panchayat officials and frontline community workers together worked to provide rural communities with whatever they needed, not only for, for testing, tracing, institutional quarantine, but also isolation centers in the second wave, vaccination. The entire vaccination program was done through microplanning and helping the vulnerable to enrolling them, taking them physically, transportation was arranged and so on. So panchayats, SAGs, women self-help groups who produced sanitizer, produced masks in lakhs and lakhs during a time when they were urgently needed locally. Self-help groups, frontline workers, Anganwadi workers, Asha workers, helpers went way beyond the call of duty. We had village rehabilitation workers. So capacities are there. What we need to do is provide the little spaces for these capacities to manifest themselves, provide the kind of constant enabling guidelines or enabling orientations and trainings. I mean, I still remember the lockdown happened in March 2020, and we had an online session just like this. We had a YouTube live session because there was no way we could reach people physically for in-person training. And we had a YouTube live session for all our panchayats in Karnataka. And we presented whatever little information was available at that time, this was 3 years ago, about what was then called coronavirus. I don't think it was widely called COVID right then, but it was called coronavirus and some WHO. So we had PPTs and we were presenting them, but very quickly by that evening, communities across Karnataka and rural Karnataka had converted these into wall art, street art, rangolis on the ground to show people that this is what a coronavirus looks like, this is what a virus is, please don't panic, but be careful. So there was a huge impact in information sharing, converting what was shared through PPT into locally usable, relevant information, which would reduce stigma, reduce panic, but also help people to take precautions. By the next morning, outside the milk cooperative, 6 o'clock in the morning, people were lining up to deliver milk in the cooperative, but there were already social isolation circles drawn, at intervals with chalk. So the capacities are there, the imagination is there, the willingness to come forward, the creative energy is there. What we need to do is to provide information, awareness, and communicate and listen. So communication should never be one-sided, but it should also, enable ways for communities to ask questions, to give suggestions, for their conversations to be respected and recognized and acknowledged. And with enabling guidelines such as Chiroshri was talking about untied funds and tied funds. So we had questions from panchayats saying that people are coming back from urban areas to rural areas, and the women and teenage girls are used to using sanitary napkins. We need to provide sanitary napkins. And so immediately we gave an enabling order. So the sanitary napkins were also provided by panchayats to women and girls who came back from. So that was the level of granularity and, the care. That was an example of care, because attention to detail is what care is all about. And I think building on this, enabling, because the panchayats are locally elected. Karnataka, for example, has around 6,000, slightly less than 6,000 panchayats. We have 95,000 and odd panchayat members, roughly one for every 400 people. That's a very viable number to deal with their concerns, to attend to their concerns, and to help them make claims upon the state for whatever services and for entitlements, and to help them out. So this is something that's an opportunity waiting to be really realized. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Uma. We've exceeded our time for this webinar. I wanted to see if any of the panelists would like to share any final comments before we end.
Just wanted to say thank you so much for organizing this wonderful discussion. It's so heartening and encouraging, and all the speakers have been outstanding. But most of all, Dr. Arash, your initial remarks also were very, very beautifully articulated. Thank you for setting out the context so well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks. It was really a good learning for everybody, and I learned a lot in this thing. I think it was a very good learning session. And it is always good to listen to Uma ma'am everywhere. She is such an encouraging and example for others.
Yeah, thanks from me too. It was a huge learning experience. And the way all the presentations were connected and complemented each other was very interesting for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Martha. Thanks.
Thank you, really. It really brought out all the points and aspects and dimensions together. So, and I think the questions and challenges that are before us, and that's yet to be learned. But thank you so much, really.
Thank you, friends. Thank you. for this very inspiring and uplifting discussion, which no doubt has left us with many questions, which we will then be encouraged to explore further, because it's not a trivial or superficial question. It's a fundamental. I think that one of the points that Mubashira mentioned, which kind of stayed with me, is it's a question of how you replace, I don't know if I got it right, but profit-seeking principles with life-building principles. Basically, when that's what frames your social structures, your economic structures, then it places limitations on what communities, individuals, institutions can do. Now, within those limitations, there's a lot we've discussed about what we can achieve. But our next webinar, which is going to be next month, is going to look at that, the transformation of economic structures, which will be essential for, in a sense, seeing through these changes that will be needed for building a more caring world, and also a world that's more resilient and better prepared for a next crisis which hits us. Thank you again, and I hope we have a chance to collaborate again with the panelists, and also I thank the participants on Facebook as well as on Zoom. Thank you for your time and for your comments.